Hey, this is Joe Hubbard from JoeHubbardBassVideos.com coming at you today with another lesson. And this is the sixth and final lesson of my functional non-diatonic harmony course. Today's lesson is on functional harmonic analysis. With that in mind, grab your bass and let's get started. As a musician in today's world, it is imperative to be able to analyze any composition you are playing from the standpoint of knowing how each chord relates to a primary key area, momentary modulations, or complete modulations, moving us to a new primary key center. 75% of all harmony can be reduced to three main possibilities. What I want you to look for first is chords that function as a tension chord, wanting to resolve somewhere. This is usually the 5/7 chord. The next thing is listening out for a preparation chord to or from the 5/7 chord. This is what would be known as the 2 chord. Or look for the definitive resolution chord, which would be some type of a 1 chord. These three categories make up the dominant, subdominant, and tonic categories and would include all of the chords from the major and the minor 2-5-1 progressions as well as their diatonic substitutions. What I want you to be on the lookout for next is any secondary dominant chord or any extended dominant chord. Remember that any dominant 7th chord can be preceded by its related 2 minor 7th chord or 2 minor 7 flat 5 chord. It doesn't matter whether the dominant 7th chord is functioning as a secondary dominant, extended dominant, or a 5/7 of a key. It can be preceded by its related 2 chord, and you need to be able to look for those and see those and find those quickly. The next thing that I want you to be able to identify is dominant 7th chords that resolve down 1/2 step. These are tritone substitution chords. And then you need to follow that up by being able to recognize the remaining chords that belong to the diminished 2-5 substitution chords. This is going to be the flat 7/7 and also the 3/7. Remember that any one of those dominant 7th chords can function as a substitute for the 5/7 of a key. As you move on, you want to start looking and going through a checklist, looking to see, do I see any modal interchange chords? Now remember, most of the modal interchange chords are just your 2-5-1s in major and minor and your diatonic substitution chords. But remember, aside from that, we had 3 chromatic, non-diatonic modal interchange chords that didn't come from either major or minor directly, but were parallel keys, and they were the flat 2 major 7, the sharp 4 minor 7 flat 5, and the flat 7 major 7. So I want you to be able to spot those within an analysis. And remember, everything that you go through is not going to contain everything, but you need to keep this checklist in mind when you go through these things. The next thing that we really haven't talked about is diminished 7th chords that function as passing chords, and you often see these between 2 strong tonal chords within a specific key area. So for instance, if I had 1 major 7th moving up to a diminished 7th, a 1/2 step above, and then going to 2, notice there's a chromatic bass line that's created there, and this would be a diminished passing chord, and you would call that sharp 1. You always analyze it in the direction that the progression's moving. So if we had 3 minor 7, and then there was a diminished 7th chord a 1/2 step below that, we would call that flat 3 diminished, and then that would go to 2 minor 7. It would create that chromatic descending bass line. This is really important to understand. These passing chords, diminished passing chords that are sandwiched in between 2 strong tonal chords. The following example is an analysis of the harmonic progression to the jazz standard, All the Things You Are. What I want you to do now is to download the PDF with the harmonic analysis of All the Things You Are on it, so you can follow along with me as I go through this analysis step by step. One of the first things we want to take a look at is the form. The form is A-A-B-C. What we mean by that is the A section is the main theme of the tune, It's like the verse, if you like, and then we go to the second A, which is pretty much the same thematic idea, but it modulates to a different key. We go to B, this is really functioning like a chorus of a song. And then it comes back to C. C is really, the first 5 bars of that is the same thematic idea from the first A section, but then it's extended by 4 bars, so it's really a different section, so we call that C, but it's very closely related to the A section. The number of bars in the tune is 36 bars. We need to know this so we can start to internalize this information as part of learning repertoire. This is what this is about. You need to understand how to analyze something and play it and learn to play it. And if you're unaware of things like the form, you're working from your back foot already. So make sure that you get that together. So if we start with section A and go through all of these chords, and let me explain to you how this functions. We want to look at the key signature first. The key is the key of A flat major. And some people look at the first chord and they see it as F minor 7 and they analyze it straight away as in F minor. But what you want to do is look at this. Remember, F minor is 6 minor 7. It's a diatonic substitute for 1. So see if that can function as a substitute for 1 first. And also another way to look at that is look at the last chord in the tune. And what I mean by that, if you look at the second to the last bar, that's the last chord of the tune. When we end the tune, that's where the tune will actually end, and then it will hold over. Okay? The very last bar of the form is a turnaround that takes us back to the first chord of the song. So it's looking at this, the last chord is A flat. You'll be able to see straight away that the first chord can function as a 6, which is a diatonic substitute for 1. But what we want to do to just validate that is move to the second and the third and the fourth bars of the first A section and see that that's just a straight 2-5-1. Pretty definitive. Remember, the most definitive sound of a key is heard when you hear a 2-5-1. So if you see a 2-5-1 glaring at you, you want to write that down and kind of say, okay, that looks pretty strong, preceded by a 6. A 6 is a substitute for 1. If you can see that those first 5 bars there are really just a 2-5-1. And what I mean by that, in the 5th bar we have D flat major 7, that's 4. And remember, that's a substitute for 2. So it's really important to understand how these things function. So we have 6 minor 7, okay, going to 2 minor 7 to 5 to 1 major 7. D flat major 7 is 4 major 7 in the key of A flat. We then go to the next bar. This is the second bar of the second line. We have a 2-5 in C, and then it goes to a 1 in C. And the 2-5 is harmonic rhythm is 2 beats per bar, and then it's 2 bars for the 1 major 7 there. This is a direct modulation. There's no way you can analyze this in the key of A flat. It's just directly modulated to another key. And this happens and you need to look for these things. And it's pretty strong. It's a 2-5-1, and it's no way we can really tie that into A flat. So that's a 2 minor 7, 5-7 to 1 major 7 in C major. Okay, now let's look at the next 5 bars. And if you're really thinking ahead, you would have already seen that this is a modulation of the previous first 5 bars that we went through, modulated into a new key. Look at C minor 7 and try to call that a 6. So 6, okay, then it goes to the 2, and it goes to the 5, and then it goes to the 1. So see how I got C minor 7, F minor 7, okay, B flat 7, okay, and then it goes to E flat 7, okay, A flat major 7, and then you have A minor 7, D7 to G7. That whole 8 bars is a modulation where against the or in relation to the first 8 bars. We had the key of A flat, and the second 8 bars modulates up to the key of E flat. So that's kind of important to look at, and to note those patterns, the actual sequence there, and see the commonality that's between it. So I've got 6 minor 7, I've got the 2 minor 7, I've got the 5 7 to 1 4 major 7, all in E flat, and then it goes 2 5 1 in G. Okay, now this is kind of cool because when we look at this A section, one of the compositional devices that is often talked about when people are talking about writing music, and in regard to studying songs and studying formula of songs, is to look at this and see that the first 5 bars was in A flat major. Okay, then the next 3 bars is in C major. Okay, then the next 5 bars is in E flat major, and then the next 3 bars is in G major. Now if I spell those keys, we have A flat, we have C, we have E flat, and we have G, and that spells independently an A flat major 7th chord. Now what's cool about that is a cool writing device. So if you're writing music and you want to modulate to different keys, start thinking about ways that you can have a common thread going through your modulations that takes you back to the overall key center of this song, which is A flat. Okay, so very clever kind of thing, and a lot of people don't pick up on this when they look at this, but I've studied a lot of composition in my time, and this is really what's going on here. So that concludes the A section. What we need to do now is move on and take a look at section B. By taking a look at section B, we can see clearly that it just stays in the key of G, except it stretches the harmonic rhythm of the chords. So I have 1 bar of A minor 7, 1 bar of D7, 1 bar of G major 7, 2 5 1 in the key of G, so 2 minor 7, 5 7, 1 major 7. It then modulates to 2 minor 7 flat 5 to 5 7 flat 9 in E minor. Okay, so that's, kind of an important thing, and that's the relative minor of the G major. So we go 2 minor 7 flat 5 to 5 7 flat 9. Okay, now the next chord is not a minor chord, it's a major chord. So this is an example of our mixed 2 5 1s. So it goes to 1 major 7. Okay, so then what happens is that the last chord in that section is a C7 sharp 5. That's used as a pivot chord that takes us back to the C section, where the first chord is going to be F minor 7th again, and that's also functioning as 6 minor 7th. So what we're going to call that C7 sharp 5 is a secondary dominant 5 7 of 6. So moving right along with section C, we look at the first 5 bars. They're identical to the first 5 bars of the tune. So we've got 6, 2 minor 7, 5 7 to 1 major 7, 4 major 7, and here's where it changes. Notice it goes D flat major 7 to D flat minor 7. So that goes from 4 major 7 to 4 minor 7, parallel minor key. This is our modal interchange chord. Okay? And what happens there is that it then descends back to the major key, 3 minor 7 in A flat, then the next chord is a diminished 7th chord, moving down 1/2 step, and identify that immediately as a diminished passing chord because it's moving as a chromatic line between the 3 minor 7 and the 2 minor 7. So we're going to call that flat 3 diminished 7th. Okay, and then we've got 2 minor 7, 2 5 7, and then 2 1 major 7. And if we played this tune, that's where we would end the tune, but there's one bar there that's left over as a turnaround that takes us back to the top. If we're going to play this in a repetitive nature, like most tunes are, you play the head a couple of times maybe, then everyone takes a few solos, you play the head again, out, there might be an intro, there might be a little bit of an outro as well, but that's more of, it gets involved in arranging. But the idea is the essential form is here, so that turnaround is G7 to C7. Now the C7 is the secondary dominant, leading us back to the 6, so 5 7 of 6, and the G7 is our extended dominant chord. What we need to do now is apply the walking bass line ideas that we've worked on previously in order to enable you to learn this tune and thus make it part of your repertoire. So by taking those lines that we worked on previously, what I want you to do is outline what's going on with this, all the things you are. If you learn to weave these bass lines through the changes of this tune, you're going to end up with laser sharp harmonic clarity, and this is what you want. You want your bass lines to sound like the tune, even if a piano player or a guitar player isn't backing you up comping chords behind you. This is a litmus test of whether your bass lines are any good. You can hear the tune without chordal accompaniment just from the bass line. So, and this is quite challenging, but it's something that I want everyone to work towards, and it's certainly, you're going to hear the evidence of this just with these lines that we've worked on so far, which are very basic, they're very simple, but remember, the difference between a professional and an amateur is the professional really knows his basics. So we start this off by taking the, if we look at the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th bar, we've got our 2-5-1. And I want to use that line there. So preceding that for the 6th chord, I'm going to take the root 5th, double chromatic from below. We've used that before in some of the lines we've done. Then I'm going to walk down. Now I can't play that whole line because I've got the 4 major 7th chord there. So what I want to insert there is one of those lines we used before that's one of my favorites, which is 1, 2, 3, 5. So now I've got this. Okay, now from here we have that 2-5 in C major. So I'm probably just going to play it with the open strings. You could shift if you wanted to, but here I've got the open D, then I come here, and then I'm just there at my C major 7th chord. So again, the harmonic rhythm of the D minor 7 to the G7 is 2 beats, so I'm just going to play the root and then the chromatic approach above and below. Doesn't really matter how you orchestrate that. Either or works, and it's a 90%er. It's something that you really want to latch on to. And then over the C major 7, I'm just going to arpeggiate the chord. Why not? Just play an arpeggio, because you can use this, especially on walking things. But notice how we've made it a little less obvious, because some guys get into doing that and they do it on every change, and it starts sounding like an exercise. But now and again you can just play an arpeggio. I've studied the lines of Ray Brown and Ron Carter quite extensively, and those guys now and again just play an arpeggio. But it's used as mixed in with a wide array of vocabulary, and therefore it works and can be used dynamically to sound good. So that's kind of what you want to work for. So the idea there is, now I've got this. Okay, so and if you've ever heard All the Things You Are, you'll know straight away you're hearing that tune. There's no question about it. That tune is being outlined very, very well. And if I was just playing this with a trumpet player, just bass and trumpet, he would be able to solo over this tune creatively and be inspired by listening to a bass line like this. So the next section is exactly the same but modulated to the key of E flat. So what I want to do is really kind of keep the same lines for this exercise. I don't want to get it too complicated. I want to give you guys something to latch on to. But even the way I'm doing this and changing, you'll see I'm changing up a few octave displacements and stuff, it sounds good. So, you know, it's, you know, of course you don't want to just play this every chorus, but, and you want to work on being able to improvise. And I encourage you guys to buy my book, Walking Bass Lines. I know it's a shameless plug, but it's such a great book. And people who buy that really, really benefit. And it'll keep you busy for the next year. It's got jam-packed with loads of exercises, and it kind of takes what we've done with these exercises here and takes it to the next level. So I encourage you to buy that book for more information specifically on walking lines. So if I modulate this to the next section, I've got my C minor 7. I'll use the same idea, root, 5th, double chromatic from below. And then I'm just going to arpeggiate that up. And notice how it's a different fingering, and you got to get used to the sound you're going after and where you can get that from every angle. So that's kind of cool. So I've got that going here. And now I'm just walking down, playing my 1, 2, 3, 5 over the 4 major 7 in E flat. And then I've got that 2, 5, 1 in G. And notice how I play the same line that I played here, but I use octave displacement. So that's an interesting thing. Look how it really sounds different, or adds a different dynamic, or highlights it in a different way, or lifts it slightly from what you played before, but it's exactly the same thing, just applying the octave displacement technique. So I really like that idea of what we have. So go through this. This is the 2A sections that we've done so far. Go through this, get this down, and then we'll come back and we'll start taking a look at section B. Moving right along with section B, it starts with A minor 7, D7, G major 7. And I can play that stock line that we had there because it's 1 bar of the 2 minor 7, 1 bar of the 5, and then 2 bars of the 1. So I can play that exact line, which was an exercise, and it will serve a purpose and it will sound good. I then go to the 2-5 in E minor. And this is kind of cool because it's emphasizing that dark note of the minor, the flat 5. Then when I go to the B7, that becomes flat 9. Okay, and then instead of going to my E minor as a 1 chord, I'm going to go to the E major. So here I've got this, but the next chord is going to be C7 sharp 5, and I'm just going to play a chromatic line leading up. So I'm going to the root, the 9, and then a double chromatic to the root of section C. So this gives us some really nice ideas with these 2 5s, because you can play through those exercises. Here's the minor 1 mixed into the major, climbing up to that C7, and then pivots me right back to that 6 minor 7 in section C. Now when we get to section C, notice that I play that climbing line climbing chromatic line leading me up to the 6. That's going to be my first note. So I'm just going to use octave displacement, and it's going to change it up slightly. It's going to change the dynamic ever so slightly to go back there. And again, it's just having a command to be able to manipulate the chords in that way, which gives you so much more freedom and creativity that you're going to be able to apply to your bass lines. Eventually, this is going to lead to you having a real command of improvisation with these things. Maybe now it's a bit slow, but stick with it, because this is definitely the road to success with that. So I've got my root 5th, double chromatic from below, and then it's exactly the same. My 2 minor 7, 5, the A flat, D flat major with my 1, 2, 3, 5. Now I go, here's the change where it hits our modal interchange chord, the D flat minor 7. I'm going to use the same line that I used here, because it's like a motific development idea. I've got this simple line, I change one note of that line, and it gives me that sound of the minor chord. Very powerful, very, very powerful. And it also stops you from farting around or trying to do something too complicated that takes it away from hearing the actual changes. So that's a very subtle change. Now here I wanted to employ some inversions, because that's another way we can change up our line. Octave displacements, inversions, different techniques like this, just simple ideas. As I'm going here from that D flat minor 7, I'm going to just come up one step and then just arpeggiate back down the 3 minor 7 chord. Okay, and then it comes in from the 7, but it's a nice little effect to do now and again. So I'm not playing from the root, and it leads by step from my previous line. Nice, okay? And then what I want to do is go into that flat 3 diminished 7th chord. I could go down to the root, that would be a nice sound, but why not do another inversion, just because we're talking about inversions here, and go from the 3rd. So from the 3rd I've got the 3 flat 5, the double flat 7, and then the root. So I can go, and then goes down by a half step to the 2 minor 7. Now here I use octave displacement just to go back to my original idea. Resolve here, and then here's the end, the last 2 bars. I'm just going to play that G to the C, and then I'm back home to the top of the tune. So I've got some really cool ideas here throughout this last section. Practice. That just about wraps up today's lesson, but before we go, let's talk about what we've learned. In today's lesson, we've learned a step-by-step procedure for analyzing chord progressions found in songs. We've also learned a complete overview for interpreting harmonic progressions that you will be confronted by as a professional bass player. We then learned to create bass lines in order to complement an analysis for you to start adding to your repertoire. As always, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively. Now this is the sixth and final lesson of my functional harmony course, and I hope you enjoyed it. So I'll be checking in with you next week for lesson 1 of my jazz improv course. Until then, take care.